Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another PTC Nordic Talks webinar, where we are honored today by having Sven Jagebro from Cognizant for a session on trends and their implications on manufacturing of the future. But first, a very quick introduction about myself, and my name is Torbjörn Pitzon, and I'm the Alliance Manager for PTC in the Nordics, and we are running all those webinars same time every week, where we also invite customers and partners for some inspiration on digital transformation to see what is possible and how to make things happen. And all the past webinars have also been recorded and are to be found on the registration site. And the agenda for today is first a very quick overview of PTC by my colleague Carl from the Customer Success team, and then Sven will start by introducing himself and touch base on a few challenges, how to address these, and then explain some of the outcomes. And at the end, we are also having a Q&A session, so please keep your questions to the end. So now over to you, Carl. You're muted, Carl. You're still muted.
Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. So PTC is an international software company with headquarters based in Boston. We're developing software mainly for manufacturing companies since 1985. We offer tools for the digital transformation, such as CAD for design, PLM for managing data, IoT for connecting products or manufacturing operations, and augmented reality to visualize and interact with the digital thread. To you, Sven.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining here today, and thank you of course to PTC for inviting. I had the privilege of presenting this in a context together with PTC and Chalmers a couple of weeks back, and we thought it could be interesting also to share in this context. So my name is Sven Jagebro. I lead Cognizant Consulting in the Nordics. We have offices in Oslo, Gothenburg, Copenhagen, and in Stockholm, and also in Helsinki, and work across different companies in the manufacturing logistics space, of course, as well as in other verticals per se. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take a step back and look at the macro picture and say, what does a manufacturing company need to be able to do in the next 5 years-ish in order to be successful over time, to be sustainably successful over time? And the first one that, of course, is the external pressures that is impacting the industry. So we all know about COVID. We've all experienced what COVID has meant for our businesses. We've all heard and seen on the news, as well as experienced in our companies, how it's disrupted supply chains and so forth. And I think a lot of people are partly, calling COVID over, right? But we can see that with the lockdowns happening in China and so forth, there is a high probability that we will have lingering effects for some time. At the same time, we can also see that volatility in financial asset prices have increased to historically massive, volatility levels. So here, the futures contracts for steel, for instance, which is one of the more used commodities in the manufacturing industry, in a very short period, quadrupled, creating a lot of pain overall and a lot of pressure overall. We can also see macro events coming online that just, at the start of COVID wasn't even seen as fathomable to imagine, right? That companies would exit Russia in mass because they were starting a great war in Europe again, right? And in this case, right, we can see how Carlsberg is doing it. So we don't think that these things will suddenly go away. We think that the world is going to continue to be dynamic and challenged with, the superpower, challenges that goes across China, US, and the disruptions that will evolve from that with the evolution of the virus and with the commodities prices and the resulting kind of interest rates. So this is putting a lot of pressures on companies to make sure that they are operationally agile and that they have financial resilience to actually cope with these type of challenges. If we then look at this from a consumer point of view or from a customer point of view, we can see that expectations that consumers and customers are experiencing in one industry is carrying over to others, which means that B2B companies and traditional manufacturing companies are generally experiencing a much higher pressure from their customers for providing better digital experiences, from their employees in terms of how they are empowered to service their customers in a better way using digital experiences. And companies are also starting, manufacturing companies are also starting to ask themselves if we should serve direct to consumer, or if we should enable B2B2C companies and be successful in that way. Whichever one that we choose, right, will have significant consequences on our capabilities to service customers through customer experiences, which is putting pressures on companies additionally, right? And then if we look at this, right, that challenge turns into an ecosystem challenge, because if you decide to serve consumers directly, for instance, that, and if you go to a servicification or a product as a service type model, there's a lot of new capabilities that you're going to have to be able to service your clients with, right? In terms of the way that you service them, the way that you distribute them, the way that you take returns, the way that you refurbish them, and so forth, right? Adding a lot of new capabilities to companies that they either need to develop themselves or develop together with partners in their ecosystem. Microsoft, for instance, when they transformed from selling, Office as a package in a box in retail to selling it as a subscription model with Office 365, right? Suddenly they couldn't give incentives to their current retail channels to actually sell it because they couldn't give the kickback on the box. So they had to learn how to sell direct to consumer. Also, what happened was that their product development unit didn't have the incentive to build the smallest increment of a new box that would get consumers to upgrade. But suddenly the task of product management was, how do we ensure that the consumer feels enough value evolution that they stay with us and pay another month, which transforms how you need to do product management, and so on, so forth and so on. So it's important when you look at this and how you service customers, either you go direct to consumer in the future, you stay in a B2B environment, servicing others that are going to consumers, to look at what is the focus of our role in this ecosystem, because it's really easy to get into a situation where you start to innovate in areas where you should not necessarily have differentiating capabilities or don't have the realistic opportunity to truly differentiate on your capabilities in that space, and rather in those instances choose to work with a partner, choose to exist in an ecosystem of partners in a collaborative way. Then of course, supply chains, everybody's seen what's happened with supply chains over the past 2 years, but it's not only about that period, but also we see that there's additional pressure from regulators and customers to create transparency and visibility through the supply chain in order for them to look at origination of different materials that you source and use in your production, but also in terms of how you allow your partners further down the chain to do planning. In some instances, we work with logistical companies that transport, vehicles, and there, of course, there's pressure to enable maybe cars to be over there updated while they're in transit on the ships, right? Creating, needs for them to help, customers to automate that process in an effective way. There's also aspects on sustainability that goes into supply chain visibility that are really important that we keep in mind, because as mineral prices and commodities fluctuate, and especially if you look at, for instance, the battery vehicle industry and the batteries themselves and the minerals that go into that, the ability to actually not just have a supply chain that is outbound, but that is also inbound in terms of a circular supply chain, right? Circular economy type of a supply chain, where you can take back materials that you've sold to harvest materials and then put that back in production, is potentially a competitive advantage in some industries where, for instance, the likes of Tesla have been quite explicit about how much they want to make sure that they get their car batteries back to put back in production, because the material cost and the access to minerals and materials to fuel their growth of EVs is a a limiter to their ability to be successful as a company. Finally, right, looking at sustainability, there's a question if who's going to make, create the biggest pressure on sustainability. We know that customers are starting to choose partners that have clear roadmaps and ambitions on sustainability. We know that consumers are behaving and purchasing with a consciousness and a conscious much bigger than what they've had, asking for the origination of the cocoa that is in their chocolates, or the steel in their cars, right? Again, putting, linking to the sustainability, the visibility of the supply chain importance for companies. We also know that investors, the BlackRock CEO famously said 3 years ago, right, that they cannot invest in companies that are not sustainable. And regulators are catching up, right, with the EU taxonomy and so forth, putting additional kind of opportunities for companies to show leadership in the sustainability space, and then to invest in creating leadership in that space. So we believe that those items are transformative to a large extent to many manufacturing companies. And when you look at transformative initiatives, it's really important to think about how you empower the people of the organization to really be part and take part in such transformations, because otherwise, there's a big risk that you won't create lasting change and lasting impact and build really truly differentiated business capabilities. So it is definitely our view, right, that intelligent transformations uses data, insights, and analytics to help empower people to be part of this journey as the manufacturing industry transforms over the next, or continues to transform over the next 5 to 10 years. The other thing that we see as advice is that when you build these companies, right, you will see that you have an almost endless opportunity of digitalization across the value chain. But if you look at these things, like for instance, the supply chain visibility, right? Supply chain visibility goes not just from origination to factory, but it goes on to past factory into usage, and then how it's returned to factory. So any of these capabilities, you need to look at across the value chain and make sure that you build holistic capabilities all the way through, right? Whether it's any of these areas, right? In the way that you build agility and resilience to face macro events, you need to look at that across the value chain and how you operate. The way that you deliver superior B2B2C experiences, the way that you build your operating models to match your business models. If it's a service business model going forward that you're going to invest in, for instance, that pay-per-use models that are emerging very rapidly, right? And how the operating models have to transform for that, and how you engage the ecosystem, how you create operational efficiency and transparency through your supply chain, again, across the value chain, and then how you enable circular innovation and make space for circular innovation in your companies in order to meet the sustainability demands, not just of the regulators, but of course also for your customers and the consumers, as well as the investors per se. So we believe these are fundamental capabilities for manufacturers to have in the future. And we're very interested to hear your reflections on that. If you think that we've missed something, or if you agree to them, or if you think one or two of them are more important than something else. So with that, I'd like to open up for some Q&A and say thank you, right? And the most important thing in all of this is, at the end of the day, right, to get started, because a lot of companies are doing POCs but are not scaling, and hence not really getting the impact in the organization that they would like.
Thanks a lot, Sven, for sharing all those interesting trends and insights. And as I said, I mean, let's open up for questions. So please raise your hand and ask questions to Sven. I could go first, and actually related, I mean, to what you actually last said here. I mean, how should an organization actually get started? I think, I mean, that's the normal question that, I mean, I'm always, I mean, constantly getting. And I mean, a lot of, I mean, companies, they don't really know that. I mean, they're a little bit afraid of, I mean, who should get involved? I mean, what kind of, I mean, people in the organization should, I mean, be stakeholders, being part of, I mean, those projects setting up?
Yeah, it really depends where you are in the organization. So I think if you're in an executive suite, it's really important to be very clear about what you want to be as a company going forward, what your role is in the ecosystem and so forth, so that you can give guidance to your organization. If you are in operations, normally you have pressure on, you know, very short-term incentives in terms of costs, right? So there it's really important to try to find a way to alleviate cost pressures and find savings of costs, so that you can invest in some of these future capabilities, because normally, you know, you don't have an endless amount of capital in a company, or as a COO, or for that matter, a plant manager, right? So it really depends where you're at, but it's either being very clear about what you want to do from an executive suite point of view, or if you're in operations or in manufacturing, to try to find ways to carve out both time and capital from the day-to-day operations to be able to invest in some of these areas. You don't have to invest everywhere, right? But invest in somewhere here, and think about not just how you invest in a proof of concept, but how do you actually get to scale? How do you, I think Scania has a really interesting kind of setup for that, where they have a prototype manufacturing line in the middle of their factory where they test things, and they pretty quickly can put that into the actual production facility when they see that things work, right? That's an interesting way, I think, of doing it as well. Unfortunately, the answer is a little bit, it depends who you are, right?
Yeah, good answer, thanks. We have one question also from Richard Dooley. Please go ahead.
Hey there, Rich here from Tesco in the UK. We see a big trend in our business at the moment around automation and robotics, and how that can enable our operating models. I think the challenge is, how can we more quickly iterate to refine those operating models in a way that doesn't cost loads of time and capital? We've been thinking of, we're looking at things like simulation tools, emulation as vehicles to do that. I was kind of interested in if you could give a little bit more clarification on what you meant by operating models to match business models, and what the impact of automation might have on that process.
Yeah, very good question. And as you experience yourself, right, it's a complex question. So the first bit, right? So depending on the business model, if you are if you're a pure play product vendor, or if you're transferring to a product as a service, or if you're going from a B2B into wholesale environment into a direct to consumer, the way that you know, decide to run that business model, because a lot of companies are revisiting that business model, it has to be linked to building up operational capabilities to be competitive in that space. And that operating model is what I mean with having the operating model matching that business model, because a lot of companies tend to want to maybe do things differently in terms of their commercial business model and how they sell things, but they don't necessarily relate to if they actually have a right to play and a right to win from an operating model and capability point of view to actually compete in that space. And then they just end up bleeding money. So that's what I'm after there, right? And that's when ecosystem considerations in that operating becomes very, very important. In terms of the automation, right? Once you've defined your operating model, what you're going to be the world's best at in order to compete and win in your business model, it's important to have a structural approach to it, so that you, for the lack of a better word, standardize it, right? Because the classic automation principle is you need to standardize so that you can automate, because that gives you the opportunity to consider how you deploy adjustment to that standardized model and the consequences on the automation that you've built into that standardization. And the simulation, I think, is a good idea in terms of how you leverage analytics and potentially machine learning items to test variations of that standard business process and the automation of the same in a simulated environment, because of course it's much more cost effective to do it like that than to, you know, build a POC every time. And building a POC every time is also a fairly slow process, and maybe would happen after you've done the analytical simulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I have one question also. I mean, how do you see that? I mean, a company should, find, a relevant ecosystem of partners, to work with. How do they? What's the process, sort of?
As it ties back to the previous question, it's important to be clear about what is it that we want to do as a company, right? And it doesn't even have to be on a company level. If you're in marketing, or if you're in operations, or if you're a plant manager, or if you're a supply chain manager, even within that remit, right, you will see the corporate strategy and you'll see what your role is within that. And in order to deliver what you need to do and the capability that is, you know, competitive in that space, you're going to see that you need to be great at certain things and less good at others. An e-tailer, right, somebody selling direct to consumer, will quite easily see that we need to be good at payments, right? Otherwise, you know, our e-commerce and deal commerce solution doesn't work, right? We have to have a good deal commerce and a payment solution. But if you are not the best capable to build a payment solution, you know, you should partner, right? You should go to ADN, you should go to Klarna, and you'll find the partnerships, right? So it's important to understand what are the capabilities that I need to deliver in my space, whether it's in supply chain and I need to go to having a circular supply chain. You know, maybe we're not the best ones to refurbish materials, right? So maybe we need to go to Stena Recycling, or, you know, a company that is great at that in order to create that complete capability that we're looking to do. So I think it's really important to have a capability perspective and be extremely humble for what you can be the best at. I used to work at Nokia when the iPhone came, and I can say one of the reasons why the company failed was that we were not humble about what we could be best at and what we needed partners to be best at for us. And there was a very strong, you know, sense of pride in executive management about being the best at everything because we're so big, we're beautiful, and we're, you know, we've conquered the world, right? So working in strategy at that time at Nokia, advising them on doing things radically different was a massive challenge, right? Because there was a lack of humility of what we must do. And I think the manufacturing industry is standing at a similar vantage point. You're super good at many things and you've developed massive capabilities of being excellent in what you do. But when your business model changes, and the environment changes, as we talked about, the type of things that you need to do changes. And you will not be able to be the best at everything. So you need to choose what you will be good at and choose partners to help you be great at other areas. And it takes a lot of humility.
Thanks. Good answer. Anyone in the audience having a question? I actually had a question related a little bit on what you said also, since, I mean, would you say that, I mean, the biggest challenge, I mean, for organizations, I mean, to start the process of, I mean, changing and digitalize, is that more of a cultural issue or a lack of technical, I mean, competences, or what is it normally?
Yeah, there's a set of, and it depends also what challenge that you're in, but there's a normally a leadership challenge in terms of to become more innovative, you need to empower your organization to take faster decisions. And a lot of traditional leaders in the manufacturing industry has grown up in a command and control structure, and letting go of that command and control leadership style to turn it upside down, to enable the organization to create more flexibility, more agility, more rapid decision making is much trickier in organization than you find, because change is always great as long as it happens to somebody else than you. But when you're asking executive management to change and change culturally, that is absolutely a challenge that happens throughout. I think also in manufacturing, there's a very practical challenge, which is funding, right? That you have very clear objectives for how much you're going to reduce your operating costs here and there and here and there. So you very seldom have a lot of leeway and space to invest in the innovations, even if you see them, they're clear, they've got good business cases. You might still not be able to release and get the capital to invest in it. And especially now with interest rates going up and material costs going up, so there's more pressure on management teams to sustain profitability levels, right? So that is also a very practical challenge. And again, comes back to be clear about what you're going to invest in, what you do. See if you can release funds by getting rid of some capabilities that you're having, right? You can maybe sell it off, or otherwise release capital to invest in the areas where you have to be great. So those are, I think, very standard, problems that companies run into that stifles them to get stuff done. Then, of course, silos, and many of these problems work across business, divisions or functions, right? Marketing, sales, manufacturing, product management. Sometimes that's very difficult also for organization to work across like that in value stream type models.
Right. I know, I normally getting a lot of questions from organizations, and how should they actually measure success, and what should be relevant KPIs when started defining the products?
The products as innovation products, or?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, normally if you run an innovation portfolio, you look at things such as percentage of sales from new products. You look at if it's more of a service based, you normally look at traditional average revenue per user and how that evolves, or you look at churn, right? What's the average lifetime of a customer in such a service model, and you look at, of course, customer satisfaction, which is a leading indicator for the subscription renewal in any service kind of model per se. Those are normally traditionally very strong metrics to leverage.
Right. Yeah. Well, time is unfortunately running out. So many thanks for everyone joining, and a special thanks, of course, to you, Sven, for sharing a lot of great information here. But also please stay tuned for the next Nordic Talks already next week on leveraging smart manufacturing for battery gigafactories. So with that, I wish you a fantastic weekend. And between, if you have any questions, it might be that Sven will be still on the chat. So with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.